Everybody.
Hi, how are you feeling, Andrew?
Still sick,
Oh my gosh.
but I'm getting better.
Wow, that's hanging on.
Yeah,
Mm.
unfortunately. But yeah, well, welcome, Tricia. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you kindly.
And welcome, Terry.
Thank you.
Well, it looks like we're all here and it's 5:30, so we'll roll away. I'll call the meeting to order on Monday, June 3rd. It being 5:30, we'll begin with Tricia and Rick. Have you had a chance to look at the meeting minutes of May 20th?
I have. I believe since Tricia wasn't at the meeting, she would abstain anyway, correct?
Correct.
I have reviewed them and found no errors or omissions.
I
Great.
did find an error though.
If it's
I
a
read
typo,
them. It's a typo.
we
Yeah.
don't do those.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Was it a last name, Tricia?
No, hold on. I lost it. Just a minute. I didn't think I figured somebody else would catch it, so I just skipped right over it. It's okay.
That's fine. We'll keep going. Rick, if you want to make a motion to accept.
I would move we accept the minutes as presented.
Great. I'll second that. And all in favor, Rick?
Aye.
Andrew is aye, and the minutes are accepted. And we are on to department liaison reports. Rick.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I have a batch. I'll try to make it short. I know you're not still feeling well, Andrew.
Fine.
I went to the Franklin Regional Transit Authority's annual meeting of the Franklin Regional Transit Authority Advisory Board last week at your request. There were three primary main issues that were dealt with. One was to discuss the test program of fixed weekend routes. It turns out they have such a problem of getting and maintaining CDL drivers that they don't feel it's had a fair shake. Because as an example, Memorial Day weekend, they didn't have any service Saturday, Sunday, or Monday on that fixed route schedule they were trying to adopt. So it got postponed through July so they can collect more data. The second item of interest was the free fixed route service for all the other routes that they have. The board voted unanimously to extend the free fixed route service. The issue is, and this was weird, it costs more money to collect fees, process them, do the accounting than the fees that are collected. So they lose money if they take fees. Okay, so that was approved to extend that for, I believe it was for another year. Yes. The last thing was the fiscal year 25 budget. The previous year was 800,000 and change. This year it's 5,411,000 for fiscal 2025. Last year they were 647,000 and change over budget. The interesting thing in expenses for fiscal 25 for the town of Shelburne. Shelburne is in their balance sheet of receipts and expenses. One of the about seven, actually only about 4 towns that actually have a Council of Aging route. We are one of them because we serve it, not just Shelburne, but multiple. So as I said, Shelburne is one of the few communities that serve multiple towns in the bus route. We are served through the Council on Aging. Our budget of receipts, which I thought was interesting, they last year budgeted $90,000 to provide the service for our Council on Aging service. We were 2,000 over budget, and they pushed it to 100,000 budgeted for Shelburne's Council on Aging routes for fiscal 2025. I also attended the pre-construction conference for the Bridge of Flowers rehabilitation project last week for the fire district. I have the paperwork, Terry. I will share it with you, and you can make copies and get it to Andrew if they haven't sent it to you already separately. The good news is somewhere around June 26th, they will be closing off the bridge, and they expect to complete the project by November 22nd, with a punch list running into December if there is anything to handle there. It was a good meeting, a lot of nice people. It was well attended by both Buckland and Shelburne and representatives. So I think that's good news to start it.
I'm sorry, Rick, can you say those dates again? What was the projected?
June 26th is the day they'll start closing off both ends of the bridge for access to it. They'll be fencing it in.
Okay.
Obviously, that will maintain through the entire session. So even when they go in and out, they'll close it to make sure people don't wander in and fall into fall into one of the wells. And November, I lost it again. Here you go. Why can't I see that now?
22nd?
November 22nd, sorry, yes. November 22nd is the anticipated completion date with a punch list possible between then and December 20th, if there are any loose ends. But all the details such as where the benches go, which ones are coming out, what's going to happen to the wisteria plant, things like that, all got settled.
So does that mean that they're on track to then reopen the bridge the following spring?
It does.
Wow, so that's a much quicker construction timeline than they had initially given us to believe.
Yep, and Ty and Bond was there, obviously the people that are running it, and the Northern Construction Services, the contractors that are actually going to do the work. They were all very eager to please, keep everybody happy. Seemed like a good group of people that'll be working with it, including the people from Ty and Bond that'll be on site during the process, so.
And Rick, Terry had mentioned a concern about them requesting use of parking spaces on the Shelburne side. Did that come up or not?
Oh, yes. And I made it perfectly clear that we had that presented to us last year, and that it was unanimously voted by the select board not to allow them to take those parking spaces. And in the course of the discussion, they got it down to an 8-foot by 20-foot container. And I said, that's still going to wipe out a bunch of places where previously you wanted to fence off for that and other equipment. And the suggestion came up, since it's inactive, except some small business using a portion of it, the VFW building lot as a place to put that container. And they seemed like they definitely said they would pursue that. I gave them Doug March, the commander of the VFW's name, so that they can pursue and try and locate their container there. But I made it perfectly clear that our Main Street businesses, or our Bridge Street businesses, have had enough licks in the last 2 years with the construction project and the repaving and everything, that they just need a summer and a foliage season with every parking space possible available.
Good, thank you. So there's not an active exercise business there in the former VFW building?
Yes, but it doesn't use the portion where there's plenty of space to put a container.
Oh, okay. All right.
At least that was the impression of the Shelburne Falls Fire Chief and the police representative and so on. So
I see.
We'll see if that happens, but.
Okay, great. Anything else, or are you all set?
You've saddled me like a horse, so I've got a couple more. The Valley Veteran Services, they spent obviously last month flagging cemeteries, attending and running Memorial Day events. And currently they asked me to mention they are renewing the recertification benefit of Chapter 115 for veterans in our town. Those are veterans who are facing financial difficulties. They call it a safety net program. So I mention it in the hopes that anyone who is already a participant in that program, if they haven't reached out to you, to contact the Upper Pioneer Valley Veteran Services. Police Department liaison report. As you know, we lost a cruiser. I've lost track now, 2 weeks ago, was it? Or early last week, perhaps, in an accident where no one was hurt. Very fortunate. It was declared today by our insurance company a total loss. And the chief has been authorized by Terry to continue to start the replacement process. It was noted that we have a $500 deductible and we are insured at a replacement cost. So it'll be interesting at what they consider a replacement cost. In any event, it was the 2019, so it was not the cruiser that was supposed to be replaced in 2025 fiscal, but the following. So it's getting bumped up the ladder, at least for this one through insurance, and maybe we'll still do the other one that was scheduled for this next fiscal anyway, but that'll play itself out.
Tricia, you have a question?
Is
There you
there a possibility that they could get an electric vehicle, police cruiser?
Actually, they've had so much problems with them. It's the Ford Interceptor, and they had the hybrid version, and there's been so much trouble with it, they're discontinuing that. So I don't believe there is an all-electric Interceptor, but
Was the one that
That's all.
crashed a hybrid or just a gas car?
it was a 2019. I think it was just gas. Terry, do you know?
I believe it was gas.
Yeah.
Oh, so we do have a hybrid vehicle that we just purchased, I believe, isn't that right? Yeah.
And it has not been without issues and has been out of
Okay,
service.
but
No.
that was not the one that crashed.
No.
Okay.
Yep. Emergency Management Committee liaison report. The fire chief and the emergency management director, Tom Williams, have set June 17th for their first emergency operations center training session. The chief and the director have put together a scenario for winter conditions that they'll throw in front of the committee or the committee members there, and see how they respond, what their decisions are. Basically just putting them in some training mode to be as prepared as humanly possible before some unknown event happens. Safety vests have been ordered for the emergency management team. After searching a bunch, they ended up using Silver Screen in Greenfield. So keeping the money, at least in Franklin County as well. And the publications rack has in fact got a new home, or one of the public publication racks at Arms Library. It is now there with details and pamphlets available to the public. Town Hall, we did have that meeting.
Hang on, Rick.
I'm sorry.
Tricia has another question.
Hi, Rick, do you happen to know how many of the EO Emergency Management Committee members have been trained in the incident management system?
It's none. Emergency
Okay.
Management Committee members are different from Emergency Operations Center participants. Those are 8 volunteers. There may be some who are also committee members. I'm not sure of that, but I know many of them are not members of the Emergency Management Committee. So
Okay.
this is the first actual practical training of the Emergency Operations Center
Mhm.
staff, call it, volunteers.
Okay, thanks.
Terry?
Would it make sense to address our appointments and then come back to liaison reports? I don't
Yeah.
want to,
We got a late start. We should.
yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
Rick.
that's fine.
No worries.
Well, let's see, where were you, Rick? Were you in the midst of one or in the end of one?
I was just about to start town hall, so we can make.
Okay, let's pause there and we can go to our first appointment, which I believe is with Sylvia Smith and Christine Baronis, to talk to us about the West County Senior Services District. Welcome, Sylvia and Christine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just wanted to touch base with you to bring you up to date on what we're doing now that the West County Senior Services District has been voted by the towns and signed into law by the legislature. Just within the last couple of months, we have a full complement of managers now from Ashfield, Buckland, and Shelburne. And from Ashfield, the representatives are Todd Olanek and Amy Shapiro. In Buckland, it's Janice Floriel and Regina Purrington. And you graciously appointed Christine and myself as the Shelburne representatives. So thank you for that. And we are generally, we did, once we had the full complement of 6 board members, we kind of elected temporary officers until we were full board, so that we could feel like we were functioning in a more official capacity. So I'm the chair. Amy Shapiro is the vice chair, and Janice Floriel is the secretary. In the law, it says that the officers, one from each of the towns, must be represented in the officers. So that's the complement that we have. Our main focus has been the creation of the transition plan, which is required as the next step in creating the district. So we're really focusing on the details of that. We are creating an employee handbook, and Julie Moreno and Penny Spearance are working on that. I have invited the select board members that were part of the working group that Dan Pilata put together to sit in on our meetings as kind of a guiding force, and to keep the new board in the spirit of the legislation. So well, Todd was on that working group, and he's actually a board of manager. Margaret Payne has been kept informed, but has not been had an active role in it. Penny Spearance has had an active role, and so has Barry Del Castillo. They have been contributing to help guide with the intent of the law. So that's how Penny is involved with the employee handbook with Julie Moreno. The Bob Dean from FERCog is working with us. There are some grant funds that FERCog is allowing his expertise to be shared with us. And he's been particularly helpful in looking at the insurance and the retirement pieces, which we are looking into implementing. So that will be part of the overall transition plan. We are also working on the bylaws for the district. We're going section by section, and it's a slow process, but we're working as a group to go through each section so that we get the full discussion that includes the members of all 3 towns. Part of the reason for our request to meet with you tonight is that we part of the transition plan includes determining how we're going to run the business aspect, the fiscal agent. And as you're aware, the town of Shelburne has been the fiscal agent for the consortium. And in the law, it says that we can continue to use one of the towns as a fiscal agent, or we can, contract with an entity outside of one of the towns. So we're looking at what the interest might be, in Shelburne, of continuing with that role. It would be different slightly. And I do want to thank Terry very much. She provided us with a detailed list of the components of the fiscal agent and the contact people, which we want you select board members to really know. It's been very, very informative and helpful. So thank you to Terry very much for putting that together and sharing it with us.
Angel was also instrumental in that too. So I
Okay,
can't
well,
take all the credit.
Okay, well, thank you to Angel too. And I mean, we may be tapping you more on this. So each of us on the Board of Managers, each town's representatives are having a meeting similar to the one we're having with you tonight to see what the level of interest is in each of the towns, and either taking on the role or not thinking that having one of the towns as the fiscal agent is a good idea. So we're just we're looking to get an idea of the interest in the town of Shelburne either tonight, or we are seeking a response from the towns by July 1st, so that we've got an idea of where we stand with the fiscal agent piece of transitioning from the consortium to the district. Part of with mentioning the dates, kind of the overall goal that we have is that we would have a transition plan put together and presented to the select boards for approval by October 1st. The date that we've chosen, or the reason our goal is October 1st, is that in the legislation, the budget cycle for the district starts with several components at that time. So we would look to have the district be approved by the select boards by that date, so that we can then kick into the budget cycle for fiscal 26 and be a fully functioning district by them. So that's kind of the overview. Chris, what else do we want to say? You had Chris has come on board and has been very helpful, particularly with bylaw discussion.
Yes. Well, it's a good working group and we're making progress. And it would be helpful if we could get the fiscal piece settled relatively soon. And it's a lot of work, but the group is moving along.
Mm-hmm. And we would invite, a representative to come to a Board of Managers meeting to discuss more in depth, or, we can certainly come back to another one of your meetings for further discussion if this is of interest to the town of Shelburne.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Sylvia, for that great update and overview. It's nice to see you both in the saddle and moving things forward. I'm glad to hear that Buckland and Ashfield have also got representatives at the table and that things are moving ahead. And just to address the fiscal piece of it, I did put in a inquiry to our treasurer, Angel, who I see is on the call tonight. And I have, just to gather her thoughts about the possibility of Shelburne continuing in that fiscal management or fiscal agent kind of role. Unfortunately, I did not hear back from her prior to the meeting, so I don't have a response from her. But I guess my request to you, if you have not already done so, is to have some conversation with Angel directly and share with her your understanding of what, if anything, would change in Shelburne's fiscal management role,
Right.
so that we, have a sense of what would be different if we were to say yes, and that she can then, give you her assessment and us of what that difference might mean and whether that's a positive or a negative in her view. So I would recommend that we will bring this discussion back to our next meeting once we've had a chance to confer with Angel in more depth about it. But if you would go ahead and do that yourselves, that would
We
be
can do that.
helpful in
Happy
kind
to.
of speeding that process along. Tricia, did you have a question?
Yeah, it was along those lines, actually. I wanted to see what it was that you, Christine, and Sylvia were able to review regarding being a fiscal agent. Since I'm the new person here, it would be really helpful for me to be able to review what you had and then understand how you see the new district fitting in with that. And again, what Andrew said, I think is really important about let's understand what's going to be different if we if Shelburne takes on this role compared to what it does right now.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
One,
thank you.
one other question I have in this new structure that now exists. One of the things that we will be doing in our next meeting or two, I'm not exactly sure which meeting it is we do this in, but we do our annual reorganization of roles in our liaison relationships as select board members. Terry, do we typically do that at the next meeting or the first one in July?
When we make annual appointments in June or July.
Okay, so coming up soon. And will we have a liaison to this West County Senior Services District?
We
I'm
hope
not
so.
sure.
Oh, well, I don't know that we fully discussed it. I guess my assumption is yes, but I don't know. I mean, we should bring that question back to the Board of Managers.
Okay, so that would be helpful for us to know as we're doing our own annual reorganization,
Right.
how that connection will, be going forward in terms of what kind of communication structure you all would like to set up in that regard.
Yeah. And that would be part of our bylaw discussion, because I know that's one of the sections. We've been using the consortium bylaws kind of as our model to look at those and then, revise based on the different status.
Okay, good.
And we're happy to reach out to Angel. I think that's
Yes.
important. And
Okay,
on the surface, I don't think it's going to be much different, but we'll find out.
okay, good. Well,
Right.
we'll look forward to continuing the conversation once we've had those conversations. And if you want to, bring back to us what your thoughts are about that liaison role, then that would be helpful also.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, very
Okay.
good.
Well, thank you
Rick-
very much.
Rick, do you
Thank
have
you.
any
Any other
questions or
questions? Yeah.
thoughts?
I don't. You covered it very well and you got a good plan. We see Angel, I think, is on. Does she have any comment at this point from anything she's observed so far?
Are you there, Angel? Do you?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
traveling and we stopped and my dog is barking, so
Okay.
it's loud in the background. I can just give you a quick overview. So with the district, they're a completely separate entity from the town. So from my side and the accountant side, and the accountant side. Sorry. That's
You're muted, Angel.
I think she's trying
sorry,
to
my
quiet
dog
her
won't stop
dog.
barking.
Oh, okay.
It means a complete separate set of books, different separate bank accounts. If we do their payroll, it's a complete separate payroll account with the town uses Harper's. So everything would have to be new, separate, and different cash books. So things that are done would all have to be duplicated.
Mhm.
Sounds
Okay.
substantial.
So why don't you have that conversation with
Okay, yes,
Sylvia
yes.
and Christine,
Christine.
and we will check in with you over the next 2 weeks and try to come to a clearer picture of what that might look like if Shelburne were to do it, or perhaps Buckland or Ashfield might be interested in taking that up. Tricia.
I guess I have one last question about that. What would be the downside of not using one of the towns as the fiscal agent, if any?
It would be,
Christine,
it would be some, a totally new entity getting used to who we are and setting everything up. But I don't know that that's necessarily a downside.
Mhm.
I mean, the towns know who we are and what we do.
Mhm.
And how we've been functioning and the functioning, of the activities and policies won't be that much different. So that, I mean, the upside for the towns is that they know. The downside for someone, another entity, is that it's, it's a whole new, setup of everything.
Would the other entity have to be something within the public sector, or could it be contracted through an accounting firm or something like that?
Our understanding is that it could be contracted through an accounting firm. And that's one of the, I mean, that's one of the things that Bob Dean is researching, whether there are other similar kinds of or if there are other entities, private entities that do contract with government. Private businesses that contract with government entities. So we'll know more about that at our next meeting.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, what we've learned here so far is regarding this particular issue, the learning curve is either going to be on our side and maintaining a separate set of books, or it's going to be on the other side with just getting to know a new client.
Right.
And doing the work that they're used to doing.
Right.
And finding somebody who is capable of doing what we need in our rural area.
Well, thank you. I think that
Okay.
will
Thank you.
be a good place to leave that, and
Okay, very good.
We'll look forward to convening with you again.
Okay, very
All
good.
right.
Thank you all.
Thank
Yes,
you.
thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Great. All righty. Well, we are on to our next appointment, which is with Tanya Campbell of our accounting firm, Markham, and with the Finance Committee to talk about our annual audit. Tanya, do you want to start us off? Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
If I may,
Go ahead, Rick.
the Finance Committee, I don't believe has a quorum.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure.
Is
Terry,
there just one person here from it looks like there's only
Tricia, if
one
you could
person.
just wait a minute, please.
Oh, sorry.
And, address me if you need to speak.
Sorry.
Thank you. Terry, do we, have we invited the full Finance Committee? Do we need a quorum of the Finance Committee? What is our status here?
No, the Finance Committee had posted, they couldn't get a quorum, so Jim Burnham's here. There were two other people waiting to get into the meeting, but when I asked them to identify themselves, they didn't respond. So I'm hoping it's not Finance Committee members, but
Okay.
they did cancel their meeting on Friday. So Jim is here to listen, ask questions on behalf of the Finance Committee.
Okay, and Jim, do you know if there are other members of your committee who were planning to attend tonight?
No, I don't. I've been out of town and just got back, so I haven't had any contact with them at all.
Okay, all right. Well, we will proceed then on this basis, and if there are others who join in, we'll welcome them in. Go ahead, Tanya. Why don't you start us off?
Great, thank you, everyone. My name is Tanya Campbell. I'm the partner in charge of the town's audit. I work for Markham, and we were previously Melanson. Effective January 1st, 2023, we merged in with Markham. So in prior years, if you look at your set of financial statements, you will see Melanson, but for fiscal year 23, you'll see them issued as Markham. Still the same group of people, same team for the audit, but just a different name this fiscal year. I wanted to start by giving a brief overview of kind of the roles and responsibilities of the different parties involved in the independent audit. And then we can take a look at the financial statements, talk about some of the numbers from fiscal year 23, and kind of answer any questions anyone might have. Just feel free to stop me at any point in time if you guys have questions or want to talk about something maybe a little bit further than I'm going through. Now, in terms of the roles and responsibilities as your independent auditors, we are ultimately responsible for issuing an opinion on the town's financial statements. We're also responsible for planning, performing our audit to provide reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatements. It's important to keep in mind that an audit does not provide absolute assurance. We don't come in and look at every single deposit. We don't scan and look at every single invoice that the town pays. That's not what an audit is designed to do. We would be in town hall for months and months on end, and nobody wants that. So our audits are conducted in accordance with government auditing standards, and we use a concept known as materiality to derive our audit testing. It's a certain dollar amount that's calculated based on the size of the town. And that drives what we test, what balances we look at, and then we factor in whatever risks there are out there. So there's always, a risk of revenue being improperly recognized. There's always a risk of management override of control, so that there's some kind of breakdown in segregation of duties or some area where somebody has control over the entire process and shouldn't. So those are always risks that are found in every audit that we perform. Now, in terms of responsibilities of management as part of the financial statement audit, management is ultimately responsible for the financial statements themselves. We assist in the preparation of those statements, as we do for every other town that we actually work with and audit, but it's management is ultimately responsible for the financial statements themselves, for reviewing them and making sure they're accurate. We provide with the trial balances and adjustments that we make during the audit process. They're responsible for reviewing those and making sure everything is good there. Management is also responsible for establishing and maintaining controls over the town and also the process, and ensuring that the town complies with the various laws and regulations, which there are many, applicable to its day-to-day activities. As part of the audit process, management is responsible for providing us with all the financial records and any information we need to perform our audit and our audit testing on a timely basis. And then at the end of the audit, they are responsible for providing us with a letter that confirms various representations that were made to us as part of the audit process. So in some instances, we make inquiries of management, other members of the town, and rely on those for our audit procedures or our audit testing. So there's just like a double check at the end of the audit to make sure that you provided us everything that we need to issue our audit report, our audit opinion, things like that. Now, in terms of the audit committee and the select board, you are responsible, or the finance committee, sorry, responsible for overseeing the entire process. You're provided with financial statements after the audit is done, certainly can reach out to us at any time with any questions. We do make inquiries of the select board during the audit process to make sure that there isn't something that we should be made aware of. And then if any major issue or concern came up during our audit, we would bring that to your attention at that point in time. We wouldn't wait till the end of the audit and bring it up, but there was no concerns or issues that were significant enough to bring to your attention during the audit process. So that communication thankfully did not have to happen, but that would be the process for that. Does anyone have any questions so far? No? Okay. Now, does everyone have a copy of the financial statements themselves? Okay, perfect. So your financial statements are presented under rules established by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, also known as GASB. If you flip through the financial statements, you'll probably see a reference to GASB on every page, every other page. You know, they are the ones that dictate how the financial statements are presented, what we need to report, how it's reported, things like that. Now, there are essentially three components to the town's financial statements. You have the audit opinion, your fund basis statements, and then after that, you have your footnotes, required supplementary information, and other information. Now, the audit opinion is actually the only part of the financial statements that belongs to us. As I mentioned before, management is responsible for the financial statements, and we are ultimately responsible for issuing an opinion on those statements. So at the very beginning of the report, you'll see the first 2 pages is the audit opinion. In fiscal year 23, we issued the town an adverse opinion, which means that based on the results of our testing, the town was not in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. This is because the town does not present government-wide financial statements, and the town does not report the sewer enterprise fund on the full accrual basis, both of which are required by GASB in the financial statements. So, you know, the financial statements themselves present fund basis statements. They should also present the government-wide statements. Government-wide statements are essentially GASB's way of taking your town operations and showing them like a business. So you take fund basis statements, which we'll look at in just a minute, and add things such as your long-term assets and liabilities. Your capital assets, you would add the long-term debt, your net pension liability, your net OPEB liability, things like that. So those are things that are not recorded in the town's general ledger, because the town does not operate like a full accrual basis business. You are a cash basis, you know, as invoices come in, you pay them out. When you set your budgets, you budget based on paying your debt, you budget based on buying an asset, you don't budget based on depreciation, things like that. So the government-wide statements are a shift in terms of how you look at the town. So it does do a good job in terms of showing the true assets and liabilities of the town. But from a day-to-day operations and looking at those numbers, that's not how the town operates. So it's not as meaningful when you're making financial decisions. You know, the numbers you're going to want to use are, you know, the town's internal records, the general ledger, or your fund basis statements, which more closely align with those. So I know there's been some discussion over the years about whether or not the town should have government-wide statements to complete the full set of financial statements and kind of get rid of the adverse opinion. That's, you know, a decision the town needs to make. You know, the biggest undertaking, I feel like at this point, in order to do that, would be to compile your capital assets. So, you know, there's no complete list of assets of the town really anywhere at this point in time. That's going to require, you know, going back in time, gathering that information. You know, you can start with your insurance. your listing of assets for your insurance. That's a great starting point. You got sewer lines, things like that. So just FYI, if the town's considering that would be a fairly decent undertaking. Also would increase, audit costs because you're adding another set of financial statements. There's additional adjustments. There's additional testing we have to do, things like that. So right now, given that the town, if you're not going out to bond for a large project, even if you are, you can have a conversation with a financial advisor about if that would be a problem, but just something to keep in mind. If the town wanted to pursue that going forward, it would be additional work, from the town's perspective, and kind of an increase in cost as well from the audit perspective.
Tanya, do you want us to pause and take questions on each section as you go, or do you want to hold them until the end?
Whatever you guys would like to do.
Okay, because it seems like we have had conversation about this particular piece of getting an adverse ruling on this question of lacking the general government statements and the capital asset inventory and that sort of thing. One question I have before we jump into that issue is about the sewer district, which you've referenced twice now. And I understand that we do vote on the sewer district's budget, but the sewer district is a separate governmental entity that has a management relationship with the town of Buckland, which manages its finances. So in order for us to implement changes to the sewer district's finances, we need to do that in concert with the town of Buckland, which we are actually looking at some of the recommendations that you made in your letter and trying to address the billing cycle questions and things like that. But from an accounting perspective, I'm just curious why the sewer district has such a focus in the town of Shelburne's finances if it's a separate governmental entity.
Because it's recorded in the town's general ledger. I mean, you do have a agreement with the town of Buckland. And, from in terms of affecting the opinion, there would just be additional adjustments that the auditors would have to make in order to present those statements on the full accrual basis. So it really wouldn't involve changing anything on the back end of how you do things, or what your relationship is, or your agreement or anything like that. It just would be additional adjustments that would be required to present them in compliance with the standards.
And just to follow up on that, are you auditing the sewer district's books alongside of ours or not?
We do not. We audit what is reported in the town's general ledger related to the sewer district. So it's the cost that you pay to the town.
So just our Shelburne's half is what you're looking at. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Andrew?
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I believe that there is no separate entity for the sewer. There is no sewer district. It is the town of Shelburne operating sewers. There is no separate sewer district. There would be no separate books. It's all in the town budget. Am I correct, Tanya? All the sewer books are in the town books.
Well, my understanding is that we have an arrangement with the town of Buckland whereby they manage the finances of the sewer district.
Correct. I'm Shelburne for 50% of it, approximately. There is no sewer district as such. It's a two-town agreement to operate a sewer system.
Okay.
When we're talking about the senior services district, that's entirely different. That is a separate governmental entity, but the sewer district is not a separate governmental entity. It's the two towns working cooperatively. And the other thing that I find interesting is the town of Buckland, I believe, is GASB compliant in their audit, and they're the ones doing most of the books. All Shelburne's books for the for the sewer users is they get, I believe, a quarterly bill from the town of Buckland for our share. It's very little bookkeeping on the town of Shelburne's part.
Great. Okay,
Right,
thank you,
right.
Jim. No, that's helpful clarification. So going back to the question of the GASB and the general statements
Mhm.
that we have so far opted not to perform. Jim, do you have things you want to share on that in that regard?
I'm not well versed enough in accounting principles to really state too much about it. But you know, in my opinion, many of the towns around are compliant. It's a relatively small investment to get Shelburne compliant and do it according to the rules. You know, and the other concern is it's as Tanya mentioned, one of the things you do is you develop a list of your capital assets. It makes it much easier to do capital planning for your budgets if you have a list of your capital assets. If you don't have a list of your capital assets, you're kind of doing a capital planning blind.
Rick, do you have questions or thoughts on that subject? You're muted.
Force of habit. I have no questions. I just wish that the finance committee had gelled and had the people who had the most questions from the finance committee members were here to ask their questions. I thought that was the whole purpose of this presentation, was for both our benefits, but primarily to answer those finance member questions. And I think it's unfortunate that we're going over this without those people having their input.
Again, it's a matter of 5 members of the finance committee and the open meeting law.
Yep.
Tricia, do you have questions or comments?
I had one question, and this would be for Jim and Tanya. If you can help answer it, that would be helpful as well. First of all, welcome both of you to our meeting. Thank you for coming. Jim, you said that there would be very little investment on Shelburne's part to fix this problem and to including identifying all of the capital assets that we have. Do you have a rough idea of how much that investment would be? And if we did that, would we then be in compliance with this? Because it sounds like part of the problem is not using the accrual method of accounting also.
Again, I'll remind you, you're not speaking with an expert here.
Mhm.
But yes, we looked at that within the past year.
Mhm.
And the accountants made an estimate of approximately $10,000 to make this change, to accumulate the capital information, get us in compliance with the GASB rules. The finance committee was unanimous in supporting that, and the selectmen did not put it on the warrant.
And Jim, do you know if that estimated expense is an annual expense or a one-time expense?
That was a one-time expense to gather the information. Once you have the information gathered, then it's an incremental expense year to year on your audit, not $10,000 every year, no.
Tanya, do you have any comment on that?
I would agree just generally what Jim said there. You know, the hardest part is going to be gathering the initial list of capital assets, and then every year, you know, there's a process of reviewing what was spent and what needs to get added to the capital asset schedule and recorded in the financial statements. You know, we'll talk in a few minutes about some of the long-term liabilities, but obviously, if you look through the financial statements, you'll see that even though we don't actually present government-wide statements, we still have footnotes related to town's long-term debt, the net pension liability. You know, the town still obtains an OPEB, I won't call it actuarial, a full actuarial study, but an OPEB report. So we calculate those numbers and present those in the financial statements. It's just, there's no adjustment to report those numbers in the financial statements. So in the government-wide statements, because they're not there. So some of the work is already done on a lot of those long-term liabilities. There are, other things to keep in, there are other entries that might need to get made, but, the first year, if your auditors are converting to a full set of financial statements with the government-wide, is probably a slightly bigger fee, just because there's that initial setup of creating all those trial balances, updating the financial statements is going to be more work the first year, similar to, your first year of compiling the capital asset schedule. And then after that, it will be incremental changes and updates. But the audit, I would assume, your future auditors, the audit fee would be more the first year specifically.
Rick,
The preparing and developing the capital list is not a slight undertaking and is not included in that $10,000 figure, correct?
Oh, I don't know, Jim or whoever talked to the town accountant, I would assume that would be the majority of the work.
That was included in that $10,000 figure, yes.
Yeah.
That they would develop the capital
Yes. Yes,
inventory?
most of the information is already out there. It's just not put into a capital list. Your insurance policies list all your town equipment, all your town buildings, things of that sort. It's things like sewer lines, maybe roadway pavement, things like that aren't on a capital list that would be added.
Mhm.
Terry, go ahead.
Tanya, it's my understanding, given the few communities that I've spoke to that are GASB compliant, they did so because they needed a bond rating for large borrowing. Is that really when it comes into play?
That's, primarily when it's going to come into play. When you're presenting your financial statements to the market, to go out to bond, they certainly don't want to see an adverse opinion, or I would assume that they don't. You would want to talk to your financial advisor about that. From our perspective in terms of the audit, yes, we're not looking at capital assets, but they're also not reported in the financial statements. Your audit itself does not change. We're still evaluating the town's internal control. We're still doing all of the testing on whatever is presented in the financial statements. There'll just be additional work for the additional numbers in the financial statements that need to be tested if you do the government-wide conversion. So again, it is a decision of the town and what you want to do. There are fewer and fewer towns that don't present government-wide financial statements, I feel like, but part of it is, like you said, because they're going out to bond and they have to make that change. So it's it's really a decision of the town.
Rick, you had a question? Rick, did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Tanya, why don't you keep going then? I think it sounds like we have the information that we need on this subject, and we can come back to it at
Just a
another
minute,
time.
Larry.
Sure. Jim, did you? Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, he's on the phone.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so that was the audit opinion. Next, you have your fund basis statements, which we'll take a look at and talk briefly about in just a minute. And lastly, as I mentioned before, you have your footnotes, your required supplementary information, and your other information, which essentially provide more detail on the amounts presented in the fund basis statements, or as I also mentioned, even though the town does not present government-wide statements, there are still footnotes on the long-term debt of the town, your net pension liability, and your net OPEB liability, which we'll also talk about in a few minutes. So if you have the financial statements in front of you, if you look on page 4 of the printed statement or page 6 of the PDF, I don't know if people have them printed or open on their screens. We will flip to that page, and that page is the balance sheet. this is one of your fund basis statements. And as I mentioned previously, these statements are very similar to the internal records of the town.
I'm sorry, do you want us to look at page 4 or page 6?
If you have it printed out, it's page 4, like the number on the bottom of the page is page 4. But if you have it on your screen and you have the PDF open, it's page 6 of the actual PDF itself. And it says balance sheet governmental funds. At the
Oh,
top
but
of
it's
it.
numbered page 4.
It is number page 4. So I wasn't
Okay,
sure if people
thank you.
had the paper or
Yeah,
the
no, I'm looking
PDF.
at the electronic, but thank you.
Okay. Okay. So that's page 6 of the PDF then.
Okay.
Right. So if you're looking at the statement, you will see in the first column there is labeled general fund. That is actually the town's general fund, which is your main operating fund, as well as all the town's stabilization funds. Those are listed in that column as well. There was a Gatsby statement quite a few years ago now, time flies, probably 2009, that required the town to present the general fund and the stabilization fund in one column. Similar to the state. So the state of Massachusetts has its rainy day fund that is in its general fund. So in order to align the state governments and the local governments, that change was made. So it's labeled general fund, but it includes all of the town's stabilization funds as well. To the right of that, you have 2 major funds. So the Little Mohawk Road Safety Improvements Fund and the Community Development Fund, excuse me. Those are shown separately because based on the size and the amount of activity, they're required to be presented separately in your financial statements. And then lastly, you have your non-major governmental funds, which are all your other grant funds, as well as your trust funds. So those are grouped together in that one column. We're going to look at kind of the bottom left of the page where it says fund balances. In the general fund column there, your unassigned fund balance of just under $960,000. That is made up of 2 amounts. So the first of which is your general stabilization fund. So that's your largest stabilization fund that can be spent. It's not one of your restricted stabilization funds. So that can be spent on essentially anything the town needs to use it for. That balance is $333,000 at the end of fiscal year 23, which is a fairly healthy balance. It's about 6% of the town's annual operating budget. You know, from our perspective, you know, looking in and, you know, financial advisors, bond rating agencies, you know, the bigger the balance of that fund, the better. You know, you never know when there's going to be a pandemic or you know, something crazy like that coming up, or you're going to need to spend. So, you know, it's good to set money aside into that fund. The town has, you know, consistently in the past put free cash into that fund over the years. So that is a good practice.
Tanya, doesn't the state give you a little bit of trouble if that fund gets too large?
The general stabilization fund?
Yeah, that there's some pressure to say, well, maybe you should give some of that back to the taxpayers.
You know, it would have to get pretty large, I would say, for it to be a problem. I mean, I've seen, you know, cities and towns with 10 to 15% of their operating budget in the stabilization fund. I've never seen the state come back and say that's an issue. You know, you might have more of an issue with the other piece of that dollar amount, which is your unreserved balance in your general fund. So that's, you know, essentially the starting point for the town's free cash calculation. And if your free cash, you know, DOR recommends that it's at least 3 to 5% of your operating budget. The town of Shelburne was, you know, somewhere just under 8% of the operating budget. I would think if that number got too high, that, you know, could be a problem and DOR could have an issue. But again, I've never heard of them saying anything about either of those numbers, for a town being too high or having concerns about that. Certainly from a school district perspective, that is, they're capped at the 5%. They can't have excess of that, or they have to return it to the members. But from a town's perspective, I've never seen that be an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So both pieces of that balance, like I said, the $330,000 in your general stabilization fund and the remaining $630-ish thousand in your general fund unreserved are both healthy balances, and have increased slightly over the prior year, which is a good sign as well. A couple lines up from that, in the committed balance, you have your special purpose stabilization funds. So the town has a number of specific stabilization funds for certain purposes. Those make up about 150,000 of that balance in the committed line there. And those balances also increased from the prior year because the town has put money aside into those on an annual basis to fund them as needed.
And what's the difference between committed and assigned?
So there's more restriction because your general stabilization fund doesn't have as many restrictions on it as your special purpose stabilization funds, because those are they're set aside for a specific item or group of items. So those, if you look at the fund balances, non-spendable is obviously you're not allowed to spend it. Those are your trust funds, your trust fund principal balances that cannot be spent. But if you work your way downwards, they're less and less restrictive in terms of the classification. So because the special purpose stabilization funds are set up for a specific purpose, they're more restricted than your general stabilization fund, which is why that they're reported in different kind of buckets on the financial statements here. There's schedules.
So committed might be the OPEB trust fund and assigned might be the vehicle stabilization fund. Is that what you're getting at?
The committed balance is all your special purpose stabilization funds. Your OPEB trust fund is shown on a separate page.
Okay.
And it's not presented in a similar fashion as these, unfortunately, because it's a different type of, because it's a trust fund, but a very specific kind of trust fund. So all of your special purpose stabilization funds are in that committed number. Your assigned number is, things like your encumbrances, which are, again, restricted, but not as restrictive as your special purpose stabilization funds. There's the footnotes talk about what the different types of classifications are, and if they're town meeting votes or select board or department heads, like whatever the degree of responsibility is there for spending those. And there is a schedule that breaks out what's included in each one of those balances in the footnotes on page 30 of the report, if you have it printed out, page 32 of the actual PDF. So that breaks out in more detail what's included in those numbers. Does anyone have any other questions in regard to this
Andrew?
set of statements?
Go ahead, Jim.
Did that answer your question? I think I've got the same confusion about what is a restricted fund versus what is a committed fund. Are you having?
Yeah, I guess I was a little confused. Frankly, Jim, I have to say I'm reading the town budget is more informative to me than reading these kind of consolidated line items. So I'm not really needing to spend a lot of time on it.
Yeah, because basically the understanding I got from this is that all of our restricted stabilization funds are committed funds, so I still don't know what's a restricted fund. I guess I have to go read the footnotes.
Yeah, so the information is in there on the footnotes. That is.
Could you just give us an example of one restricted fund?
Sure. So if we scroll to page 32, you have
Page what?
32 of the PDF.
Okay.
So the restricted funds are your special revenue funds because they have external restrictions on them from the grantor agencies or the spendable portions of your trust fund. So, you know, when someone gives a gift to the town, they say, here's $50,000, you can only spend the interest on it. That's restricted. This is, you know.
So this looks like it's referring to our retirement fund balances. Is that right?
Are you looking at page 32?
Yeah.
So these are the fund. Let's see. So the columns on page 32 match the columns on the balance sheet where you're just looking at that. You have your general fund, you know, you have the total of what is included and committed, and that's broken out by, you know, what's committed for general government, public works, culture rec. Let me see if I can.
I don't have any columns on page 32.
Andrew, on the
Yeah.
on the PDF, I believe it's 30.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
I see.
I have
Okay.
32, I'm sorry, of the PDF and 30 of the actual printed page.
Okay. Yeah,
so
I do see
that-
columns on page 30. It says
Yeah.
it starts with note 14, governmental fund.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So that breaks out in detail what's just summarized on your balance sheet, because we can't list all those things out in the balance sheet, or your balance sheet would probably be 3 pages long. So those are the types of balances that are included there.
In the restricted. Oh, yes, I see here restricted. Okay.
Restricted, your special revenue funds. So
Yeah.
your grant funds are restricted balances. Did
I
that
think
answer
that-
your questions, Jim?
Not really, but I think I'm starting to get a little bit of a picture. An example of a restricted fund might be that housing trust fund that we just took money out of. Am I correct?
Yes, or your community development grant fund, that would be it was in a deficit at the end of the year, so that's not listed there. So it's a bad example. But
But
your
going back to
CDBG
the top, you have a whole separate column for CDBG and Mass Works. Each have their own column. So I would have thought that restricted referred to other grant funds besides those two.
Yeah. So if you at the end of it would be restricted because it has the external restrictions on it. If you scroll to the end of your financial statements, page 53, you'll see a list of your federal and state grants, your revolving funds. Those balances are included in your restricted balances because there's external restrictions on them that tell you how they should be. You can't just pick and choose how you want to spend them. So those are the types of restricted balances there. But yes, your housing trust fund is included in that one, Jim, because there are those restrictions on that fund.
Like I said, once I got to the footnotes, I would have figured it out.
Yeah, and that's it. You only get a snapshot when you're looking at the balance sheet, but the footnotes and all your supplementary schedules provide a lot more detail on the numbers that are recorded in.
Yeah. The only reason I was asking the question because the restricted amount, 500,000, represented a significant amount of money there, very comparable to what we had in the committed section. And I didn't understand at all where it was. Now I understand where it is.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yes, those are all your grant funds.
Great. Keep going then, Tanya.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to just kind of touch on, and because we don't have the government-wide statements, I can't point to them on a page, but I'm going to talk about your net pension liability and your net OPEB liability, because those are really the two biggest, liabilities that are out there, and they're most concerning to most cities and towns. So if you wanted to, you could take a look at the footnotes, because like I said, we do have footnotes regarding the pension. and the OPEB liability. And they start on 33 of the PDF, page 31 of the financial statement. That is your net pension liability. And the net pension liability represents the town's share of the Franklin Regional Retirement System's unfunded liability. So the Franklin Regional Retirement System runs the retirement system, but all the towns that are members are, make up portions of that system. And because that system is not fully funded at this point in time, you have an unfunded liability. So the town is required to fund that liability. You receive an annual assessment letter, and you do have to commit to that, paying that every year. At the end of fiscal year 23, the town's portion of that liability was just over $1.25 million. And it actually increased about $450,000 from the prior year. The main reason, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm looking at page 35 of the PDF that shows a bottom line balance of 370,089. Is that what you're referring to, or are you talking about something else? Because I'm not seeing this 1 point something million number.
Yeah. If you scroll to page 49 of the PDF, that might be the easiest place maybe to take a look at this.
Okay.
You're looking at 49 of 58, correct?
Yeah, okay, I'm on 49.
Okay. So it says required supplementary information, schedule of proportionate share of the net pension liability.
Yeah.
Okay. So these amounts are presented in thousands, but the very top line there, which is fiscal year 23, your proportionate share of the net pension liability is $1,247,000. That was your share of the liability at the end of fiscal year 23, which, if you look at the line below that, last year's pension liability was only $575,000. So it increased substantially from the prior year. The main reason for this increase was because the system itself, which operates on a calendar year basis, but calendar year 22, they suffered market value losses by about $29 million during their calendar year. So
Tanya, again, I'm struggling to find these numbers that
you won't see these
this
numbers.
reads from on 49, it goes from 2017 on the far right to 2023, and the bottom net line, which is net OPEB liability, shows it declining from 2.1 million to 534,000. 2.1 million in 2017, 534 in 2023.
Terry, can you enable screen sharing so I can share my screen? Because I think we're mixing up numbers with the PDF and the...
I'm on page 49 of the PDF.
You're all set, Tanya.
Thanks. Can you see my...
Okay, that's a very different looking page there.
Okay, yeah. So this, and my screen is 49 of the PDF, but 47 of the statement.
Oh,
so,
okay.
So I think that's part of the confusion. So this is just a summary of, it will eventually be 10 years worth of data, but we've only been accumulating it since the standard was required to be implemented in fiscal 2015. So this is the most recent fiscal year. The liability for the net pension liability for the town was just under $1.25 million. These numbers are presented in thousands. As you can see, there was a big increase from the prior year, 575,000 up to 1.2 million. And these were the result, and these numbers aren't in the financials, but just based on, reviewing the financials of the retirement system itself, they suffered very large market value losses during calendar year 22, which is what these numbers are based on. That was consistent across the board for what we've seen for other retirement systems. So this is not unusual. If you look on the far right column over here, the net position of the funded percentage essentially is what this is. The system was 80%, 87% funded last year. It's only 72% funded this year because those market value losses drove down, their cash, what they had on hand, what they had in available at the end of the year. But the liability of these retirements did not change, or they went up. So the system itself was less funded, which means that your liability went up from last year.
So Tanya, what do we take away from this if we're looking at swings in the market here? I mean, it looks like on 2019, we hit another high point of almost the same amount as we hit in 2023. Are those just swings in the market we're looking at?
Yeah, because the system itself is invested, and they are invested in fairly conservative things because they're required to be invested in those. But they're not, they still feel the fluctuations in the market. So, it does kind of do this over time. The goal is it's supposed to go up a little bit, up and down, but eventually up. Obviously the system itself and their actuaries, look at these things, there is a little bit of a smoothing effect. They don't, when they're calculating your contributions to the system, you don't see big changes, right, in your, other than the fact that they tend to go up, but, in your contributions to the retirement system, because they're smoothing these over a period of years. So, they have a funding schedule, they review it every couple of years, make changes as needed based on what has happened in the market, what they thought was going to happen in the market over the years, and adjust kind of as needed. So nothing to be overly concerned with, because it does generally fluctuate on a year-to-year basis and is impacted by the market. But just if you're looking at it and you looked at last year's and this year's, like, that's a big change. So I just wanted to point out that and kind of why that happened, so that when you're looking at it, you can see what happens there.
Well, when I look at the overall numbers, I see a really two really positive years, and otherwise it's sort of hanging around the 70 to 75% range.
Right.
And so do you give us recommendations about what we should be doing in regard to this retirement fund and how much we should be funding it?
There's not much I can, say in terms of this. I mean, this is the Franklin Regional Retirement System. They have a board, they do presentations, certainly attend their meetings and talk to them about, what they're and how they're investing, and, all that's public information. They have a set of, they're audited, they have a set of financial statements. Unfortunately, you don't have a whole lot of control over this. I mean, it is a liability, it is the town's liability, and it's out there, but this information comes from the retirement system, and we're just recording amounts based on that. Unfortunately, I can't help you any more than that, other than just staying attuned to kind of what's going on with the system, and maybe seeing what they're invested in and things like that. But like I said, across the board, all the systems, even though most of them are invested in fairly conservative things because of the type of entity they are, they still see these kind of fluctuations over the years. 75-80% funded is not bad in terms of, like, just thinking of the other systems, the audit, that's fairly standard. There are some that are significantly lower than that, and there's some that are closer to fully funded, but there's a lot of factors that go into that there's a lot of assumptions in terms of calculating this liability. I mean, there's actuarial studies, there's actuarial assumptions, you know, lots of things. So it's not an easy number to figure out like how that could change. The third column in there, the proportion of your net pension liability, that's, you know, your share of the system itself, which has kind of remained fairly consistent over the years. Not a whole lot of increases or decreases, but just as a percentage of the system as a whole, you're, you know, just over 1.8% of the system. So.
And so FERCog is the entity that would then either advise or require us to make increases in our contributions to try to bring up our overall percentage and that sort of thing?
Franklin Regional Retirement System.
Okay.
Yep. They're the ones that you know, manage the retirement system and send you your invoices for your retirement assessments every year.
And when we see a big jump, like from 575 to 1.2 million, is that going to result in a big change in our contribution requirements or not?
Not immediately. Like I said, they do smooth these over the years, and I don't know when the last time they took a look at the funding schedule. Every system is a little bit different in terms of that. I mean, you're supposed to be fully funded by a certain date, according to the, you know, the funding schedule. So, you know, over the years, and because the market typically doesn't do as well as they anticipate it doing, you know, that gets pushed out a few more years, or your contribution tends to go up. You know, this liability is an estimate, a very significant estimate to the town. And, you know, if you reported government-wide financial statements, you would see this liability in those statements, and you would see the fluctuations, the effect of the fluctuations in those statements every year. And it's not unusual, you know, to see giant swings on a year-to-year basis, because they're required to obtain a new actuarial valuation every 2 years. So there are bigger changes every couple of years, because they'll change their actuarial assumptions, which cause bigger increases in the increases or decreases depending on what happened over the past couple of years. So certainly a number to be aware of. You know, the town has a funding schedule. You are required to, you know, to pay into the system and fund this liability, and ultimately it will go to zero. That's the goal, and you'll just be paying your current contribution as opposed to all this catch up because of this liability. But you know, unfortunately, there's not really anything you can do about it. It is a number, it is a liability, and it's not really in the town's direct control. So,
Well, thank you.
yeah. And then the last number I wanted to talk about was your OPEB liability, which represents the other post-retirement benefits liability, your town's share of retiree health insurance costs. Unlike the pension liability, the town is not required to fund this liability. You're not required to establish an OPEB trust or put money into it, but I know the town has gone ahead and done that, which is good, because at this point in time, if the town hadn't, you know, it would be looked upon unfavorably. Pretty much every city or town across the state has set up an OPEB trust and started putting money into it. You know, varying degrees of contributions, which is fine, but generally speaking, at this point, most towns have an OPEB trust fund and have started putting a little bit into it over the years.
And Tanya, is this trust fund, is this sort of shielded from the market in a way that the other was not? Or I'm curious because there seems to be more of a virtuous trend here going from right to left from 2017 to 2023, right, where we look like we're in good shape, that we're whittling away at this.
Yeah, so 2022, there was market value losses. But for the most part, it's very conservative investments, and Angel could probably talk more about that if you had specific questions at some point. But it's, you know, it's a smaller liability, first of all, so you're not going to see the big swings like you will with a net pension liability. But this one is in control of the town, you know, because the town is under 100 members, active and retirees. You don't have to obtain the full actuarial valuation. So there is an alternative method which the town uses to calculate this liability, but it's allowable under the accounting standards. But just generally speaking, you know, because it's a slightly smaller dollar amount, and there's not as many assumptions or things like that go into it as a net pension liability. This generally, like you said, stays slightly more consistent year over year. You know, as the town continues to put money into it, market value, you know, hopefully returns every year. That liability should get smaller and smaller. Yeah. So.
Anything else you want to add?
That's all I have, unless anyone else had any other questions on anything. I can stop sharing my screen here. Thanks.
Terry, do you need to control the screen share or?
No, it's just minimized, so I can't like get back to the full screen where it. Sorry. I don't know if you can stop. Oh, hold on. Stop sharing. It was on the other
There
screen.
we go.
That's why.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
we're back. No problem. Anybody have questions or comments for Tanya? Jim?
Your non-expert does.
Well, we're all in that boat, Jim.
So excuse my non-expert questions here.
That's fine.
Just a little something a little bit different. I wanted to ask Tanya here. I've read with interest in the paper over the last few weeks the trouble the town of Orange has gotten into with paying fraudulent bills. Not that anybody in town was doing fraud, but they paid fraudulent bills. The town accountant, not town accountant, town administrator is quoted in the paper as saying they lacked some checks and balances, which he now has in place. My question would be, do you have any idea what those checks and balances that they were missing were? And does the town of Shelburne have these checks and balances in place?
That's a great question, because I've been wondering just kind of the same thing since I read that article in terms of how that happened, you know.
Maybe I shouldn't call myself a non-expert anymore, then, huh?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, from our perspective, when bills are submitted for payment, you know, there's a department responsible for submitting those bills. They should be, you know, before they submit them for payment, verifying that whatever it is, the work has been done, the services have been incurred, something along those lines, before they sign off and say, yes, please submit this for payment. So I don't know how those invoices made it in there, other than I don't even know. I can't even.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
the same with me. I can't even speculate.
Right. So, you know, and, you know, after every warrant, or at least once a month, you know, there should be a budget versus actual report that goes out to the departments. They should be looking at it to make sure that, you know, what they said they spent from their budget line was actually spent from that budget line. Everything jives, because they should have records of what invoices they've paid and how much is left of their budget, and should be doing a double check to make sure that someone else didn't submit a budget for their budget line, or submit an invoice, for their budget line erroneously. You know, so the town does do that, and, you know, distributes those kinds of reports. Yeah. You know, should be monitoring the budget. Anyone who's responsible for the grant should be monitoring the grant balances to make sure that, you know, something isn't erroneously charged there. It seemed like a very big dollar amount to me to
Huge.
have it continue for that long. So I don't know what happened there, but
No,
You know.
I didn't expect you to know what
Yeah.
happened there, but I just wanted, my question basically was, you as auditor, do you see that the town of Shelburne has checks and balances in place in their procedures to hopefully prevent that from happening here?
I mean, all the things I just talked about in terms of, making sure that someone submitting for an invoice has appropriate signature, we do look at those kinds of things. We do look at a budget versus actual, we make inquiries. We talk to the town about what their processes are for monitoring the budget, and looking at those things during the year. I mean, it can't just happen at the end of the year, right? You have to be looking at these on a monthly basis. So I know that all of those processes are in place. So that's,
In Orange, they paid 800,000 in fraudulent bills in the first 3 months of the year, it sounds like.
Right.
It's just unfathomable
Right.
to figure out how did those bills get by, some fraudulent bills like that get by somebody if they were approving the bills.
Right.
I just want to make sure the town of Shelburne isn't in the same situation.
Right. I mean, it seems hard to me that those bills of that dollar amount would make it through unless there's some kind of large capital project or some kind of something big going on that, where large invoices are going to be submitted, because that would be a lot of really small invoices to be submitted, and right. So they had to be fairly decent sized invoices, I would assume. If that's the case, there obviously should be multiple people looking at and signing off on a big project, invoice. Should have engineers and people involved in the actual process itself. There should be people from the town looking at that. There should be a lot of eyes on those types of invoices and, what makes those up. So again, I don't know what those invoices were for, what the dollar amounts were or whatever, but I would think that, the town, based on the conversations we've had with the town and what we've seen, that has processes in place to prevent that kind of thing from happening. That is scary though. Yeah. Yeah.
I would just say, Jim, as one of the select board members who puts my initials on the warrant as it goes out the door, that my function or value as a non-expert check and balance is mainly to question things that look unusual to me. So I'm sort of like my credit card company. If I charge something that they've not seen before, they're gonna flag it, whether it's me or somebody else doing it. But if somebody is slipping in, road salt or something into the budget that is just a standard expense, I'm not gonna be the one to catch it, because that's not jumping out at me.
I would certainly hope that $800,000 would jump out at you. Yes.
Well, yes. No, I'm just saying that the invoices that I see in the warrant that are big are often a combined invoice from a department head, and Mark, buying 40 different things, or the police department submitting a whole raft of bills, or the block grant, and in those cases, I'm largely relying on Mark and Greg and Linda to have, accurately presented those bills.
Right. And any new vendors, you should be attaining a W-9 from them prior to making payments to make sure they're a legitimate business and things like that. I mean, checks shouldn't go out the door until those are in hand. So, yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? I ran way over my allowable time. I'm very sorry.
We asked too many non-expert questions.
We appreciate you taking the time with us, Tanya.
No problem. Yeah, absolutely. So,
great.
You guys, everyone has my contact name, or Terry has it. You can share it if you guys have any other questions or follow-up questions. I'm always around. So.
Great. Thank you very much, Tanya.
Have a great night.
Thank you, Tanya.
Bye, Terry. Bye.
All right. Well, Rick, I believe you were in the midst of your department liaison reporting. Do you want to head back to that? Or before we do, Jim, do you have anything further that you want to add to the conversation about the audit before we close that out?
Not that I can really think of now. The only question I know that has come up and will come up again is, will the town receive a management letter? You know, I believe you contracted with your auditor for a management letter.
I wish you had asked that question while Tanya was present. It does state, as it did last year, that we will not be receiving a management letter because there were no significant findings. There are only recommendations, which I shared with everyone.
But your initial engagement letter with the auditor, didn't that require that they prepare a management letter?
If it were necessary, yes, they would. But for the last 2 years, we have not received a management letter, which I receive as a good thing.
You know, and you know, I myself, management letter doesn't mean a lot to me. It's the things like Tanya said, that we have the checks and balances in place and things of that sort. She had the right answers to the tough questions. You know, the things that I find a little bit interesting though was that she says one of the main, not one of the main, but one of the big chunks of what's in the audit is in the footnotes. It's the retirement liability and the OPEB liability, and she says their opinion does not address those because it's not, well, I can't remember the term she used, but it's not a government-wide audit. So again, big chunks of the town's finances are really not, they're not rendering an opinion on them because we're not following the GASB guidelines. You know,
But didn't we just go over the OPEB liabilities and that sort of thing with her and learned that that's largely out of our hands and her hands, that that's a matter for the retirement board?
correct. But, you know, all I'm saying is that if we had an audit done in accordance with the GASB principles, the management letter or their findings would include opinions on those big items. Their management report does not include opinions on those items. Those items are in the footnotes. Because we do not do our accounting in accordance with the generally accepted practices.
But I guess it comes down to the same issue to me, of why we didn't get a management letter, is that because there were no material findings. So if there were no material findings, then my sense is that if we had gotten a management letter and if we had been using these general government accounting practices, would we have gotten different or more information than we got just tonight from going over it with her?
Probably not, but you would have gotten it formally instead of informally.
Okay, so that's really the question before us, is whether we want to pay the $10,000 to get, you know, a formal letter.
It's a one-time investment.
Right.
In the finance committee's opinion, was well worth the $10,000.
All right. Well, there we have it.
Okay, thank you.
Good. All right. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Rick, do you want to wrap up where you were with the department reports?
Yes, the last liaison report I have is town hall. And I did meet with town administrator and the collector treasurer. And we discussed delinquency reports and town-owned properties. You'll recall last year I looked at this. We have currently 4 properties that are town-owned that are available to be liquidated. The auction people that do this suggested that we wait and do them as a group, because we have 2 more, one of which is more likely to bring a higher bid. The whole goal being to put these back on tax rolls at whatever it is. that they get sold for rather than just keep continuing to carry them. And the last two of the of the six will be ready for auction after August 29th. So it's sometime in September would be the earliest possible sale of the tax taken properties. And we'll look at it again come August to see if those other two finish off.
Great, thank you. And we can review that list and see where we are in our decision making at that point about what we want to auction and what we might want to dispose of differently.
Did you, Chris had her, Trisha had
I'm
her.
sorry, go ahead, Trisha.
Yeah, excuse me. Thanks for making that clarification. I was actually wondering if a decision had already been made to auction off all the properties.
No,
So that still has to be made, right?
yes.
Yep.
Okay, very
So
good.
I'm basically just keeping track of the ones that we already own, some we've owned for a long time, and the two that are coming up, so that it might make an attractive option and bring some money back. These were, I believe all of them we have now owe way more than their assessed values, so there isn't any equity taking issues or the like, but that's a discussion for another time come September. There are in the pipeline for fiscal 2023 delinquents. There are 7 properties that are in line for another tax taking for the fiscal 2023 purposes. The process for that, on June 11th, there'll be a notice of an advertisement going out to these 7 properties. They'll have till the 26th of June to pay and avoid having it published in the paper. July 1st, the advertisement would be published, with the 18th of July being the final chance to pay those off. And after the July 18th date, the taking of those properties process could begin. This is all standard operating procedure. Those folks are paying 14% interest. Some are crazy small amounts, some are crazy high amounts that they've let go. But again, nothing happening at this point, and we'll hear about how it ends up later, because it could change drastically if some of these people respond to the follow-up notices they're going to be receiving.
So Rick, these 7 are in addition to the 7 that you've previously described, and these 7 are ones that have already been liened, is that right?
No.
They have not been liened. So you're saying the first step is the placement of a lien on the properties.
First step is an advertisement of a public notice that this particular individual at this address owes this amount, as we just saw Heath publish, I think, in the Recorder last week. It's part of the process to do everything we can to get them to come in and pay and continue to own their property.
Oh, before we place a lien on their
Correct.
property. Okay, because I was just, and maybe for your edification, Trisha, that the process that Rick is describing is the beginning of a long process of taking that can take a number of years before you have an auctionable property. But placing a lien is kind of on the front end of that process when somebody doesn't pay their taxes.
Those 7, as I said, are remainder holdover from fiscal 2023. The fiscal 2024 delinquency report has 255 properties or tax bills that are delinquent right now. They were due on May 1st. Normally in this fresh cycle, the letters that are sent, demand letters they're called, that are sent to these property owners happens in August. And at our meeting last week, it was the consensus that cash flow is very important. the town does borrow money occasionally for operating expenses when larger payments need to be made. We don't want to draw down too close. And so the consensus was to send them out in June. Just say, hey, you haven't paid, send it up. We think one of the potential issues is that, as you know, we get 2 tax bills with 4 payments. The first bill comes, you pay that first payment, then you put the second notice payment in a drawer somewhere. And if you don't look at it again, all of a sudden you're delinquent. We think that's a possibility of, it seems to be more delinquencies after on the second payment after the actual bill went out. If that's the case, it's all the more reason to go ahead and get that demand letter out sooner than later. So the decision for that to go out in this calendar month was made as well. I believe that's the end of my liaison reports. Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for all that work. That's that was a lot of
Yeah, I'm sorry that was so long.
No, not at all. No, it's very informative. And Terry, do you have more you want to add on the town side?
No, not at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
I do not have a recent update from Mark for the highway. I apologize. I've just been under the weather. The last time I met with Mark was a week and a half ago with Rick when we were visiting the property over on Church Street to look at the retaining wall. And I think as we reported back by email, that none of us are recommending any town action in that regard. We've all came to the conclusion that the wall looks like it's on the property owner's property, and that Mark thought that she could proceed with her drainage project, you know, and if you know, they worked carefully, they probably wouldn't disturb the wall. But in any case, it did not look like it was going to impact any town-owned infrastructure. So we're not recommending take any action there. I will have more updates on the highway at the next meeting. On just another subject, we will be coming to the Pocket Park, and regarding the rules, I did pass by the Pocket Park today and had a brief conversation with Mike Nobriga, who's the carpentry instructor for the tech school. And he let me know that they plan to wrap up that project on Wednesday of this week. So they are very close to the finish line. They had just a few more things to do, it looked like, and it's actually looking quite nice. I think despite the very long timeline for that project, the students have done a nice job with it, and it seems like it's fits into the overall streetscape nicely in my view. So we're looking to finish that up this week. I did speak to Mike. We had a brief conversation about signage for the park, because we had talked at one point about putting a little, maybe a metal sign in the triangle of the pavilion, that the owners had been interested in calling this the Salmon Falls Park. And anyway, he mentioned that there's a guy named John Pasilia, who's a blacksmith, who was teaching at Pioneer and is now down at the tech school, I think, teaching welding, who might be somebody who could work on that with us, perhaps as another student project even. The good news of that one is that if it took them 3 years to do it, it would not impact the usage of the park. So we would not have to close off the park for another tech school project, but we can talk about that down the road. I just wanted to let you know that that project is coming to conclusion and looking good. And I think that's all I've got in the department end of things. And now we are on to the pocket park use and rules for consideration. Is that, do we have something to talk about tonight on that, Rick, or where are we?
Yeah, I would like to just give a quick review for Tricia's sake. I know she's been sent a lot of the information, but basically I was looking to start the conversation about some posted rules for the use of the pocket park, precipitated primarily when we had somebody basically say they're staking claim to a block of time on a specific day, and had plans to have a sandwich board put in so that people wouldn't be there, that they'd have to ask to leave and all this stuff. And I started to see the slippery slope of the attractive nuisance that it could become. So I started looking into what other towns do. And I can't find a park that doesn't have rules and regulations as to do's and don'ts. And I thought that we should put a moratorium on that until we had a full select board to discuss it. Andrew felt that I was trying to fix a problem that didn't exist, I believe was your words. I take the position of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And when you look around and see every other town has these regulations, Buckland, as an example, has an application and a 3-page use policy overseen by the rec committee. Ashfield has a 5-member parks commission, and it's restricted to the use for residents only, interestingly. And every town I looked at, Turner's, everyone, they all have rules and regulations. And it just seems unwise for us not to have some basic, elementary, simple rules and regulations, that won't allow it to turn into more of an entertainment center or exhibition center, and be true to the original purpose that the townsfolk voted, which was, an undercover picnic table session to stop, pause, watch people go by, have a cup of coffee, whatever. But we know that people are people, and things will perhaps be taken advantage of. So I had come up with basically a very simple bunch to start a conversation. Since then, I've added one actually, which I found in almost all of the others in a similar situation where no grills or cooking allowed. If we don't have a little sign that says that, and we call it a pocket park for picnics, what's to stop somebody from putting up a hibachi and some charcoal briquettes and firing it up and doing burgers? There's nothing to stop it. So why wait until something like that comes up, would be my opinion. And let's just put together some simple rules. So very quickly, mine were no grills or cooking allowed, no smoking, vaping, or alcohol allowed. Every single park I saw had that rule. Every town park. No moving of the picnic tables allowed. Several had that same thing. No canopy or tents allowed. No signs, postings, or flyers. You can just imagine what people do to telephone poles. I don't see people stapling to that beautiful structure we've got flyers and postings. What's stopping them if we don't have a rule that says you can't? And no scheduled use of the facility is allowed. That is because we don't have a Parks Commission or an application system for use, and we have no one to police it and operate it. I think the best part is that it's just for the random use as people stop by. So I'm not asking to vote on a set of rules like that. I'm asking for the three of us to take some time and think this through and come up with suggestions of something that we could have that would be, I don't want to write War and Peace here. I'm thinking a small, maybe 2 foot, 1 foot tall placard displayed at the entrance area from the street that would just have these 5 or 6 little safety notices that, hey, don't bring alcohol in here. Don't be smoking. I don't want to be at one of the 6 picnic tables, I think, with my grandchildren.
4 picnic
It's 4,
tables.
okay. I don't want to be at one of the 4 and have the next table over, people vaping or smoking or whatever. So I think some prudent, small regulations like that make sense. And I think since we have a board of 3, our hands are tied for a subcommittee. There's no such thing with a 3-person board because we'd be a quorum, of course. So I think if we individually came together and said, what can we live with? So I would like to put this updated version together of my suggestion for a sign, since I initiated this and have done the research by looking at what other towns are doing. Send it to you folks, or to you both, and have you come to the next meeting, to our next meeting, and say, I've got a problem with this one, or I think there's actually another one we should add, or why do we need this one? And start a conversation and see if we can't come to a meeting of the minds and prevent something that we need to have angst over happening because we failed to address very basic common sense use regulations.
That sounds like a fine way to start the conversation, Rick. I think if you want to circulate your draft to the 2 of us and to Terry, that would be a great starting point. I think one other item that comes to mind as somebody who has already seen the park being used in this regard, unfortunately, is picking up dog messes and that sort of thing. So
Right.
that becomes another question to be addressed as to how that will be handled. I think that the concern that I shared with you, Rick, at our previous meetings and remains the concern I have is sort of in the enforcement and management question. It's one thing to say these are the rules, but it's another to say where does the buck stop in terms of how these rules get implemented or managed. And so I'm interested in hearing Terry's thoughts on the management question.
Well, my dream career was to become a park ranger,
All right.
and that didn't happen. But I see this as an opportunity.
That's perfect.
I'd have to give that some thought and just see what other towns do for use permits, to see whether or not, I know we had said we didn't want to become a booking agency. We certainly don't want to make money off of booking, because then the property owners would like a portion of monies received if we start receiving income. So I think all of that has to be considered. But I do think there should be some kind of guidelines, or it will just become anything goes kind of an area.
I think we were also advised by our attorney that if we start subletting the park out and charging fees, that it increases our liability for things that happen there.
Yeah, it could be something as simple as our parade permit. When people want to use the streets or close the bridge, that they submit a request for the board to consider, just to reserve the space. But I don't know that I would want to open it up to family gatherings and birthday parties, because the original intent was to be an area that was enjoyed by everyone that wished to sit and picnic.
Yep. And I will add that was one of my fears, is that if we allowed the first person who already came to us and said, hey, I've always been allowed to do this by the previous owners, which doesn't count anymore because it's not in their control any longer, it's in ours. And here's what I intend to do. It gave me a lot of concern that who's next? I mean, this person had said, well, I'll get a sandwich board and put a sign out the morning of Sunday morning and say, hey, this is reserved for, or there'll be a fiddle music from 4 to 6, was it, or something like that, so this afternoon. That the next day we'll see a sandwich board that says, hey, we're going to have a goat yoga. You know, the next day we'll have a sign that says, hey, we're going to have, I don't know, whatever, just use your imagination, it'll become a contest of people trying to go out and hosey and reserve a section of a day and a time that we can prevent if we just said, you know, no, there's no reservations. And if you want to have that kind of a structure, as Terry suggested, and you suggested, Andrew, we would definitely need an enforcement group. We'd have to have a new committee for pocket park committee use. And I don't think the town needs that. It's there for spontaneous use. Like I said, a coffee, a bucket of French fries and a Coke or whatever, to stop and just take a brief thing, and to have somebody block off 2 hours on a beautiful Sunday afternoon that would literally render it unusable by other people doesn't make any sense to me. But the more I thought about it, then I said, well, geez, people are, if we call it a picnic area, you know, might worry about a hibachi and charcoal briquettes being used under there. And as you said, dog walking and alcohol use. You know, we don't want people packing in there with things that are less than friendly to anyone who may happen to come by. So a small sign that said, here's 4 or 5 things that you can't do, and we ask you to be respectful of other people's use around you. So I'll start with that. I'll send it around and we'll have it at our next meeting and see if we can come to a meeting of the minds on what makes sense.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Letter to the DPU regarding intent to purchase streetlights. That's you, Jeff, is that right? Oh, and John is here too. Which one of you wants to speak to that question?
Jeff, you're on mute.
Yeah, John, you can, do you want to respond to the?
Sure. Good evening, everybody. We submitted a letter that has to be signed and sent to Eversource to start the process of the streetlight purchase. We're recommending that be held off for another 2 weeks until we've had the streetlight hearing to see which lights we would like to have discontinued. Jeff has been going around posting pink flyers on poles that we're suggesting to discontinue, considering that they're redundant and their spacing is not the most lineal, I suppose is the best way of putting it. You know, there's several that are closer than others. They seem to be redundant to lights on Bridge Street. There's some old abandoned streetways, such as the end of Water Street, that when it used to go all the way through, the light remained there, but then there's still another one right over around the corner on Main Street. And speaking with Esther, it's our understanding, and I sent her an email confirming this, that once we've had the streetlight committee meeting, we would want to then send a letter to Eversource through the regular process saying that we would like the 5 or 6 or whatever number of lights we want decommissioned to be create a work order to have them disabled. Then we would not have to pay for them. If we send that letter before we have sent that information, then we're going to be on the hook for all the lights that are currently being built. So we're just asking you to wait at least another 2 weeks and then send that letter out.
That sounds fine, John. One question I have: in your conversations with Esther, did you get a sort of clear rules of the road in terms of the sequence of steps that are needed to decommission a light? I mean, you do have to hold a public hearing, but are there other steps involved in that process?
No, the day after that meeting, all we have to do is inform them through whatever work order process that Terry may be familiar with already. To say, please disconnect these particular lights and poles on pole numbers. We have all that information that Jeff has been courageously collecting over the last 8 months.
And that list would then need to be approved by the select board, right?
Well, that's what
Correct.
the hearing would be.
That's what the
Yeah.
hearing, yeah.
Right, the hearing is for the discontinuation of those lights.
Okay, and we would invite the police chief to weigh in on the safety side of things too.
Yeah, I haven't taken him the list, but I intend to meet with him before that meeting too, but we should definitely try and get him there. That would be great.
Okay. Good. Rick, Tricia, do you have questions or thoughts for Jeff and John?
Nope.
Well, just thank you for all your hard work. That's really amazing. And for
It's
thinking this through about how to save money even further.
Yeah, it's been kind of a fun project to find all those little things. Actually, John got really good word from Esther because some of the lights that we thought we might have to pick up and pay for, she said they're not really on our radar. We don't have to worry about them. So that actually saves us a few more. So little by little, it's all coming together. So that's very cool.
And we did find one light that we're being billed for that was never replaced, so she's gonna take that off of the current invoice
Current list.
going forward.
Great. Well, nice cleanup job there to get us pared
Sure.
down to the right lights for the town.
Yeah, and I have flyered all the homes around the lights that we're talking about taking it down, and I've also tried to talk to as many of those people as I can, and I'll go back and try and catch some more that I missed on the first round. So it's been very, very encouraging because a lot of the people really were supportive of the lights that we chose to take down, and there's only been 2 of the 10 that we suggested taking down that people really want to keep. So we'll probably take those off of our list of getting rid of. So yep.
Rick?
I do have a question. It occurred to me after we communicated over the weekend on the work you've been doing, and hats off to you, as Tricia says. Is the notice in the newspaper of a public hearing all we have to do? Or do we have to notify by mail the abutters? And the reason that question came into my mind was you had mentioned, as you just did again, that you talking to people and doing a great job and saying, you know, what do you think of the light? Do we know if they're tenants or if they're owners?
I'm trying to track down the owners when I can. Some have been tenants, so they're not
Okay.
necessarily owners, but I've also tried to ask for the tenants to forward it to the
Okay.
owners because I
Because you
didn't
certainly would
necessarily know
want
who
their
they were.
input.
But yeah, it's a good question. It's a kind of a sticky one. Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, if we're just removing the light fixtures, we could put them back up if we get complaints down the road too. So I suppose, you know, it's not the end of the world, but I'd like to head that off if I at all can. And that's why if we're getting people that are suggesting at all, like it's usually the dog walkers who mostly don't want to see some of the lights come down in certain key spots, or just that they know that the road's more important than I thought it was. And so in those kind of cases, I'm happy to just take it off the list to remove, and we'll just go ahead with plan B, which is to put shields on them. So we'll try and do the best we can to reach out. I don't know if Terry knows any other way to do it, but
I saw you did post the public hearing in the Two-Town News, so
I also did that. Yep.
you've got some word going out already. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
and I
got-
had posted something on Facebook, but then checking with Terry, I realized after your earlier episode tonight, it would probably be better not to put that on social media. So I took those off, so there's nothing on the board right now.
Okay. Good.
Great.
Well, if there's no further questions, we'll pick it up again at our next meeting.
Yeah,
Great.
there's one further update, which is in talking to RTE, We finally have a clear understanding of different pieces that they continue to kind of include in their final report to us. So we have a meeting scheduled for this Friday. We're hoping that after that, we'll have the finalized audit report, that once that is signed off on, then we can give them the word that we would like to continue with their services to procure the services of the contract.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
We've been looking into any potential hidden costs that may not have been recognized. And I think we've got everything nailed down at this point.
you need any action from us in that regard?
No, I think, like I said last time, when Bob signed the contract, it actually was much more extensive than what the
Mhm.
original intention was. But so we had a 1 week notice of intent to terminate. I'm just saying we don't need to invoke that termination.
And remind me, what is the date of the public hearing for the streetlights?
2 weeks,
17th
17, 2 weeks. from
On
today.
Monday?
It's
Monday.
our regular scheduled meeting.
Oh, at our meeting, we will do that. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
I don't think
Yes.
it'll take very long. There's maybe probably gonna be 8 lights or something to actually have to walk through, and we've got it pretty well. You know, we
Right.
should be able to just kind of knock them off of a list and
Great.
as long as it's-
I have
Alrighty.
a process question though, and maybe Terry might be the person. We would go through each individual poll and ask for any comments. If there's no comments, then does the board have to actually vote to approve the removal?
Yes.
Okay,
And are we gonna do that poll by poll or in a bunch?
It's a good question.
I think poll by poll would be more reasonable to, since there may be individuals who may not want the one in particular in front of their house
Right.
turned off.
We can
Okay,
do it like the omnibus budget where you
Right.
read
right.
the 8 polls, people can hold them out.
Yeah,
That's a good idea.
that's true. That might be more efficient. Yeah. Good. All right. Well, we will take it up in 2 weeks then.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
guys.
All righty. Thanks a lot. And we are on to new business, the Mountain Lodge 7 Main Street regarding a 1-year lease renewal for the senior center. Sounds like there's no changes to the lease. Is that correct, Terry?
That is correct.
And do we need a motion to renew?
Yes.
So moved.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. The motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All in favor, Rick,
Aye.
Tricia?
Aye.
Andrew is aye, and the motion is carried. So we have renewed our lease, and that is that 3 years or 5 years, Terry? Oh, 1 year,
It's
1 year
2
lease.
years.
2 years.
It'll be a 2-year, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. It says 1 year on the
It's
agenda.
interesting. It does say for a term of 2 years, starting July. Yeah, the dates are for 1 year, but the verbiage says 2 year. So I will follow up with them
Okay,
and leave the corrected version out for your signatures when you come in to sign the warrant.
very good. Okay, thanks. And we have Hitchcock Brewing Company LLC regarding 1-day liquor license requests on August 11th and 18th. More on that.
Hitchcock is seeking a 1-day liquor license for events at Apex Orchard. They
Oh,
have
these are
done it-
more or Apex.
Yes,
okay.
yeah, so this will be the 3rd brewery hosting events at Apex.
Okay,
And all their paperwork is in order and they're well-known establishments.
good. So we've approved 2 other sets of events for Apex, and this is the 3rd one. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. All in favor, Tricia?
Aye.
Rick?
Aye.
Andrew is aye, and the motion carries. And do we have any other business?
I just have one item, and that's just formally mentioning that Paul Hollings has resigned from the Community Preservation Committee after accepting his role as a planning board member.
Do we need to move to accept that?
It wouldn't hurt, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a motion there?
I will move we accept the resignation with regret.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, and all in favor, Rick,
Aye.
Tricia,
Aye.
Andrew is aye, and we are down now 2 seats on the
Yes.
CPA, is that right?
Yes.
As Susan Flackis also stepped off the board. So keep your ears to the ground if there are new people who would like to step forward. That would be great to restaff that committee as they move into their active year. I think this starting July will be their first year kind of in full operation as a committee with funding coming in the door. Terry, I had one item just as not to discuss at this meeting, but to put on the agenda for the next one. I'd like to request that we meet with, I'm assuming that PV Squared has accepted our commission there to do the pole barn solar work.
They're in the process of executing the contract. So that hasn't been fully executed yet.
Okay, because I was going to say once they have executed that contract, I think it would be helpful to meet with them to kind of run through the timeline of the project, to give the board a chance to ask them questions. And I'm in particular interested in their response to the tax credit payment question, since we didn't get a good answer from either of our proponents on how they're planning to handle that. So I'd like them to address that at that meeting.
Okay.
That would be great. Rick, I'm sorry, Jeff.
Sorry, I just wanted to, I sent around a note to you guys that there's also a 10% additional rebate being kicked around. FERCog would know the ins and outs of that, but we should definitely look into that because that could actually up the rebate on to like 40% of the solar. So
Yes, one of our proponents did actually reference that in their proposal, so
Great.
we're aware of that one. And that would be certainly another thing to get onto the table. But thank you, Jeff, for highlighting that. Yeah. Rick.
One last thing real quick. At the last meeting, you had mentioned the offer of our tree warden of some old growth pine for the replacement of the Salmon Falls sign that now hangs on the Rod and Gun Club building at the corner of Bridge and excuse me, Deerfield Avenue, which is in horrible condition for sure. And I told you I would look into it. I have. There is a fine master millwork craftsman in the village, or in Shelburne rather, not in the village, who is also willing to join and prepare that donated wood. And I reached out to a contact in Greenfield who has a CNC in routering machine and is more than excited to take a whack at the engraving to match the existing wording, the existing font, bold face, light face. He'll do an exact match of that one that's there. And I will continue gathering information on it and come back. Oh, and the Rod and Gun Club said, yeah, go ahead, change the sign, whatever you want, no problem. I did reach out to the building inspector to see if we would need any permission or a permit just to take one down and put a new one up. I haven't heard back, but I just want to let you know I am chasing it as promised.
Thank you, Rick. That's exciting news. And is this person with the CNC router willing to do this as a donation, or do they want to be paid for it?
At a significantly reduced price. I have thoughts on it, but it was like $100.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So fairly incidental then.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for doing all that homework. That's great news. And I was thinking, I don't know if you're passing through town, but you might want to, when you are, just to photograph the sign, because it's in such bad shape that you'd want to get some record of it before the lettering becomes illegible. You know.
I sent you that. You have it actually.
Oh, you have it already.
But
Okay.
you were ill, so.
Okay.
But I sent you a PDF actually with the sign as it is.
Oh,
and then-
good.
And then
good.
the first layout, the first draft of the layout that the CNC operator
Oh,
offered to do.
fantastic. Okay,
we're-
thanks. No,
I'll
I was
have
just
a-
worried that last time I looked at it, it was in such bad shape. I was thinking it was becoming illegible, but
Yeah,
anyway,
it's close to that on one line.
yeah. Tricia,
Sort of on a related note, can we replace the Welcome to Shelburne Falls sign on Route 2 at North South Street? That
North
one's
South
also
Street.
in very bad shape.
Which sign are we talking about?
As you're coming in from Greenfield, it's on the right,
Mm.
right before you get to the big beaver pond.
Are you talking about the one that's near the
I've-
auto parts store?
By
Mm-hmm.
Flaccus's.
By Flaccus's.
Oh, way up there. Oh,
Yep.
that sign. Oh, because there's a Shelburne Falls sign by the Corvair building.
Yeah,
That's not the
yeah.
one.
No, the one I'm talking about is that big one that's used to have lots of colors on it. And just since I've lived here, it's faded a lot.
Oh, okay. And
Um,
whose sign is that?
I think the Business Association or a grant many years ago had that installed.
Yeah, the
Hmm.
Business Association did get it installed, but I don't know who owns it. And since the Business Association is now still
Defunct.
somewhat defunct, yeah,
Yes.
I don't, it's sort of in a no person's
And is
land.
that a sign? I'm just having trouble picturing it. Is that one that it has the ability to put several signs into?
No,
No.
it's not a tourist-oriented directional sign.
No.
I think it was a home, it's specific to
Oh,
the
okay.
village.
Okay.
It is on, although it looks like a private driveway, that is a town road. Up almost to halfway up their driveway, what looks like their driveway. The town owns at least halfway up it. So where the sign,
Over the,
over the little bridge.
Going to the Flaccus's place?
Mhm,
mhm.
Okay.
yep. And
It's
so
called
that's
North
why-
South Road. Yeah,
Okay.
It is, okay. I didn't know that it had a name. I just knew the town owned it. So yeah, the sign is on the town property there at the side of the road.
Well, I don't know, Tricia, do you want to research that sign, or is that something you're interested in?
sure. I'll do it.
Okay.
That'll be fun.
Good.
I hope.
Well, you can find out what its origins were and what the prospects might be for refreshing or replacing it, I suppose. Or just
Okay.
taking it down if we don't want to have it anymore. I don't know. But good. All right. Well, we'll look forward to those sign updates at our next meeting. I don't see any correspondence. Is there any public comment? Hearing none, we'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, Rick,
Aye.
Tricia,
Aye.
Andrew is aye, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks,
all.
everybody.
Thank
I-
All
you.
right.
I
Great
also
job,
threw-
Andrew, for a sick man. Great job.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
really
know.
good.
Yeah,
Take
hats off
care.
to you. Very